It was a quiet afternoon in a small suburban neighborhood, the kind where every sound felt louder than it really was. The trees swayed gently, their shadows stretching across the sidewalk as a tall teenager walked home from basketball practice. His gym bag hung over one shoulder, and his old sneakers scraped against the pavement. He had his earbuds in, lost in a song that made the long walk feel shorter. His mind was on simple things. Homework he still had to finish, the leftover pizza waiting in the fridge, and the game he'd played earlier that day. Nothing about that moment felt unusual. It was just another ordinary day in his life. He turned the corner of Maple Street where the houses were lined up perfectly, all with neat lawns and white fences. The sun was beginning to dip lower, painting the sky a soft orange. He didn't notice the police car coming from the opposite direction at first. The sound of music in his ears blocked everything else out. When he finally looked up, he saw the cruiser slowing down beside him. He didn't think much of it. Maybe they were just patrolling. But then the car stopped completely. One of the officers rolled down the window and called out, "Hey, you there, stop for a second." The boy paused, pulling one earbud out. He pointed to himself, unsure if they were talking to him. "Me?" "Yeah, you," the officer said, stepping out of the car. "Come here for a moment." The teenager hesitated. His first thought was that maybe they needed directions, but as the second officer got out too, he felt a strange nervousness in his chest. He tried to keep his tone respectful. "Is something wrong, officer?" "You match the description of a suspect we're looking for," the first cop said. His hand rested near his belt. "Where are you coming from?" "Basketball practice," the boy said, motioning to his gym bag. "At the community center. I'm just walking home." The officers exchanged a look. The second one stepped a little closer, his eyes scanning the bag. "Mind if we take a look in there?" The teenager frowned slightly. "It's just my clothes and shoes, sir." "Go ahead and open it," the officer insisted. The boy slowly unzipped the bag, showing a pair of worn sneakers, a water bottle, and a damp jersey. Nothing else. The first officer leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "All right," he said. "And what's your name?" The boy told him. The officer typed something into his car's computer, but it didn't seem to satisfy them. The teenager stood still, trying to stay calm even though his hands were starting to tremble slightly. The street was quiet except for the chirping of crickets in the nearby hedges. A neighbor watering his lawn across the street looked over, sensing something unusual. The way the officers were circling the boy didn't look like a friendly conversation. "Do you have any ID?" the officer asked. "It's in my bag," the boy said, reaching toward it carefully. "Slow down," the second officer barked. The boy froze, startled. "I'm just getting my wallet." "Hands where we can see them," the first one interrupted sharply. He lifted his hands, heart pounding. His mind spun with confusion. He hadn't done anything wrong, yet suddenly it felt like he had to prove his innocence. "I didn't do anything," he said quietly. "Just follow directions," one officer said. "Turn around for a moment." "Why?" "Did I break a law?" "Do as you're told." The words hit him like a slap. His throat went dry. He could feel his palms sweating. The tension hung heavy in the air, thick and unspoken. The boy's body language was calm, but his eyes revealed fear, the kind that comes from not knowing what might happen next. Across the street, a woman holding a grocery bag had stopped walking. She quietly pulled out her phone and started recording. Another man near his driveway glanced over, unsure if he should intervene. Everyone had seen stories like this on the news. No one ever imagined it could unfold right in front of them. The boy tried to explain again. "I swear I'm just walking home. You can call the center, they'll tell you I was there." But the officers didn't listen. One of them said, "Keep your hands up," while the other stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "Why are you shaking?" the first one asked. "Because you're yelling at me," the boy said honestly. The officer didn't respond. Instead, he motioned toward the ground. "Sit down right there." The boy obeyed, lowering himself to the curb. His heart hammered so hard he could feel it in his ears. A police car's lights weren't flashing, but the authority in their voices made the situation feel serious. He thought of his mother, who always told him to stay calm if he was ever stopped by police. "Don't argue," she used to say. "Be respectful. Keep your hands visible." He was doing everything she taught him. Still, it didn't seem to be enough. Minutes passed like hours. The officer in the car was still typing on his computer, occasionally glancing up. The other officer paced nearby, hand still near his belt. The boy tried to breathe evenly. "Can I call my mom?" he finally asked. "Not yet," one officer said. "We need to confirm some things first." "But I didn't do anything," the boy whispered again. A car drove slowly past the scene, the driver staring in curiosity before moving on. The bystander's phone kept recording quietly. Every small movement felt magnified. The boy didn't dare move his hands. He just sat there looking down at his sneakers, dust on the tips, feeling smaller than he ever had before. One of the officers circled behind him, talking into his radio. The words were muffled, but the tone wasn't friendly. The boy couldn't help imagining the worst. He wanted to believe everything would be fine, that if he just stayed calm, they'd realize their mistake and let him go. Suddenly, the second officer said, "Get up." "Turn around," he hesitated. "Why?" "Just do it." His legs felt weak as he stood. He turned slowly, trying to show he wasn't a threat. "Hands behind your back." That's when panic hit. "Wait, what are you doing?" "I didn't do anything." The officer's tone hardened. "Don't resist. I'm not resisting." The louder voice made a few more people come out from their porches. A man shouted, "Hey, he's just a kid." But the officers ignored him. The boy felt his chest tighten. His breathing became shallow. He was trying to speak, but fear stole his voice. He could feel the sting of tears behind his eyes, but refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of everyone. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from his mother, probably asking when he'd be home. He didn't dare reach for it. One of the officers said something into his radio again. "Possible suspect detained for questioning." "Questioning for what?" the boy asked softly. Neither officer answered. It was at that moment that a car turned sharply onto the street, tires crunching against the gravel. The sound drew everyone's attention, but the officers didn't look. They were too focused on the teenager standing with his hands half raised, heart pounding, sweat glistening on his forehead. The car stopped several houses down, but for now, it was just background noise. The boy didn't know that inside that car was the one person who could change everything about this moment. The person who loved him more than anything, and knew exactly what it meant when someone said, "You match the description." The wind picked up slightly, carrying the faint sound of a dog barking somewhere far off. The sun dipped lower behind the houses, and the shadows stretched longer. The boy stood there, surrounded by silence and authority, wishing more than anything that this was just a bad dream. He thought about how quickly things had changed. 15 minutes earlier, he'd been laughing with his friends, tossing a basketball in the air, talking about weekend plans. Now he stood on a quiet street, afraid to move, afraid to speak too loudly, afraid that one wrong motion might be misread. He had never felt so powerless. The officer's radio crackled again, breaking the heavy stillness. "We're still waiting on confirmation," someone said. The boy lowered his eyes.
"Can I please go home now?"
he whispered. Neither officer responded. A few moments later, the sound of that same car door opening down the street echoed through the air, a sound that would soon change everything. But for now, the boy didn't turn to look. He just stood there silent, hoping someone, anyone, would see what was really happening and stop it before it went too far. The car that had just pulled up at the end of the street stayed there for a few seconds. The engine was still running, but no one noticed except for the few neighbors watching from their yards. The teenager stood still, hands still half raised, trying to steady his breathing. Every sound felt louder. The buzz of the streetlight, the hum of the police radio, the faint rustle of leaves. Inside the car, a woman gripped the steering wheel tightly. Her eyes locked on the scene up ahead. She recognized that figure immediately. The tall, lean frame, the dark hoodie, the worn gym bag at his feet. Her heart skipped a beat. She blinked once, hoping maybe she was mistaken, but the fear in her chest told her she wasn't. She opened the car door quickly and stepped out. Her heels clicked against the road as she walked closer. From a distance, the officers hadn't noticed her yet. One was still talking into his radio, the other standing with a firm stance near the teenager who looked frozen in place. The woman's voice trembled for only a second before it steadied. "Hey," she shouted, her tone sharp and commanding. "What's going on here?" The two officers turned their heads toward her. One frowned slightly. "Ma'am, please step back. This doesn't concern you." The teenager turned his head slightly, his eyes widening when he saw her. Relief washed over him, but he didn't dare move. "It does concern me," the woman said, walking closer now. "That's my son." The officer who had been near the teenager took a small step back, his hand still near his belt. Your son? We're just questioning him, ma'am. Questioning, she repeated, disbelief in her voice. He's a child walking home with a gym bag. Why are you treating him like a criminal? The crowd nearby grew a little closer, sensing the shift in energy. The woman reached into her jacket and pulled out her badge, holding it up clearly for both officers to see. Her voice was steady but carried the weight of authority. Special Agent, Federal Bureau of Investigation. The silence that followed was thick enough to feel. Both officers froze for a second. The one holding the radio lowered it slowly, eyes darting between her badge and her face. Ma'am, we didn't know. You didn't know? She interrupted sharply. You didn't know because you didn't ask. You saw a young black kid walking in a hoodie and decided that was enough reason to stop him. Her words hung in the air. Even the neighbors stopped murmuring. The only sounds now were the soft rustle of the wind and the teenager's uneven breathing. The first officer opened his mouth, trying to find words. He fit the description of a suspect. She cut him off again, her tone rising slightly. The description? What description? Black male? Wearing sneakers? Do you have any idea how many innocent people that could describe? The officer's jaw tightened. He looked down, unsure how to respond. The teenager lowered his hand slowly. His mother glanced at him briefly, a silent message passing between them. It's okay now. She stepped closer, standing between her son and the officers, her presence protective yet calm. I want your names, she said, looking at both of them, and badge numbers. Ma'am, let's not make this more difficult than it needs to be, one officer muttered. She gave a short, humorless laugh. Difficult? You think I'm the one making it difficult? You pulled a child off the sidewalk for walking home. You pointed your hands at your belts while he was standing still, scared out of his mind. Tell me again who made this difficult. The first officer, now visibly nervous, gave his name and badge number. The second hesitated but eventually did the same. She took out her phone, typing them in while keeping her eyes on them. Now, she said calmly, explain to me what exactly gave you probable cause to stop him. The officer shifted his weight. We got a call about a robbery 2 streets over. The suspect was described as a young black male in a dark hoodie carrying a bag. She stared at him. That's it? That's the whole description? He nodded slowly. She sighed deeply, lowering her phone slightly. You realize that could describe half the kids at the community center right now, right? You realize that's not a description, it's an excuse. He didn't answer. The second officer spoke softly. Ma'am, we didn't mean any harm. We were just doing our job. Doing your job, she repeated. I've said those words before too. But part of the job is knowing when you're crossing a line. The crowd around them had grown. A few people were still filming. Others just watching quietly, their faces filled with mixed emotions. Anger, disbelief, relief. She turned slightly toward her son. Are you okay? He nodded, his voice small. Yeah, I'm fine. But she knew he wasn't fine. His hands were still trembling and his breathing was shallow. She put a hand on his shoulder, a simple touch that told him she was there, that it was over now. She turned back to the officers. You can check your system all you want. You'll find he has no record, no warnings, nothing that should have made you stop him in the first place. One of the officers looked like he wanted to say something, but no words came out. The situation had shifted completely. The authority they'd carried minutes ago had faded, replaced by a heavy silence of realization. The woman's tone softened, but her words were firm. This is exactly why people lose trust. You don't see people. You see suspects. She took a slow breath, then stepped forward slightly. I'm filing an internal complaint with your department. I'll also be contacting your supervisor and Civil Rights Division first thing tomorrow. The officer nodded slightly. Yes, ma'am. Good, she said. She glanced around at the people watching. The crowd slowly started to disperse, realizing things were calming down. Some gave small nods of support. Others looked away, uncomfortable with what they'd just witnessed. The woman turned to her son again. Let's go home. He picked up his bag, still shaking a little. The walk back to the car felt longer than it should have. Every step felt heavy, filled with unspoken emotions, fear, anger, relief. Once they were inside, she closed the door quietly and sat for a moment without starting the engine. She turned toward him. You didn't say anything wrong, right? He shook his head. No, I just told them I was coming from practice. She nodded slowly, looking straight ahead. You did everything right. Her voice cracked slightly on the word right, but she quickly steadied it. She reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. I'm proud of you for staying calm. He didn't answer. He just stared down at his shoes, silent. After a few minutes, she started the car and pulled away from the curb. Neither of them spoke for a while. The hum of the engine filled the space where words should have been. Finally, he said quietly, They thought I was someone else. She nodded. Yes, because they didn't look hard enough to see who you actually were. He looked out the window, watching the houses pass by. The world outside looked the same, but something inside him had changed. When they reached home, she parked in the driveway and sat there again, hands still on the wheel. Listen, she said softly. You handled yourself well. But you should never have to feel that kind of fear for walking home. He turned to her, eyes wet now. Would they have listened if you didn't show up? She didn't answer right away. She stared out at the quiet street in front of their house, thinking about all the times she'd seen similar cases in her career, only this time, it wasn't someone else's child. Her voice was low when she finally spoke. I don't know, and that's what scares me the most. He didn't say anything after that. He just nodded slowly, looking down at his hands. She reached over and brushed a bit of dirt off his sleeve, trying to hide the shaking in her own fingers. Come on, let's get inside. They walked in quietly. The familiar smell of home wrapped around them, freshly brewed coffee, the faint scent of candle wax, the warmth of something safe. But even with the comfort of their home, the tension didn't disappear. It hung there, invisible but real. She watched him go straight to his room, dropping his bag by the door. She knew he needed space. She sat down at the kitchen table and opened her laptop. Her hands hovered over the keyboard for a few seconds before she started typing. Notes, times, officer names, everything she could remember from the scene. She wasn't just doing it for him. She was doing it because she couldn't stand the thought of another mother somewhere else having to watch the same thing happen to her child. The house stayed quiet, except for the faint tapping of her keyboard. Upstairs, her son lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of how quickly a normal day had turned into something he'd never forget. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing for sure. He'd never see the world quite the same way again. The night after the incident was long and silent. The house, usually filled with small noises, the hum of the TV, the soft clatter from the kitchen, his mother's faint laughter on late phone calls, felt heavy and still. The teenager lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. He could hear the faint ticking of the clock on his wall. Each second felt louder than the one before it. His mind replayed everything from earlier. The flashing look in the officer's eyes, the rough tone in his voice, the feeling of standing frozen on that street corner. Every time he closed his eyes, the moment came back like a movie he couldn't stop watching. Downstairs, his mother sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open, though she hadn't typed anything for a while. She was reading the report she'd written earlier, going over it again and again. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago, but she didn't care. She was angry, angrier than she'd ever been in her life, but she didn't want anger to cloud her next step. She was an agent trained to stay calm under pressure, but being a mother made this different. The image of her son standing there, hands raised, terrified, played over in her mind like a wound she couldn't close. She closed the laptop slowly, rubbing her temples. The weight of the day pressed down on her shoulders. She stood and walked to her son's room, hesitating for a second at the door before knocking softly. You still awake? She asked. Yeah. His voice came from inside, quiet and tired. She stepped in. The room was dim, lit only by the small lamp on the desk. He was lying on his side, still fully dressed, his backpack on the floor beside him. She sat on the edge of the bed. You want to talk? He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. I keep thinking about their faces, the way they looked at me. She nodded slowly. I know. It's like they already decided I did something wrong before I even said a word. She swallowed hard. That's exactly what happened. He looked at her, his eyes tired but searching. But why? I didn't do anything. Her throat tightened. She wished she had an answer that would make sense, something that could erase the fear he now carried. But she didn't. She reached over and took his hand. Sometimes people see what they expect to see, not what's actually in front of them. That's not your fault. He nodded, though the words didn't bring much comfort. If you hadn't shown up. His voice trailed off. I did show up, she said softly, squeezing his hand. And I'll always show up. They sat in silence for a few seconds. The air between them was heavy but calm. She brushed her thumb across the back of his hand. Tomorrow we're going to talk about what happened officially. I already filed a report with their department. But I want you to know something. You did everything right. I'm proud of you for staying calm. He nodded again. I wasn't calm. I was scared. Being scared doesn't mean you did something wrong, she said gently. It means you're human. He looked away for a moment, eyes glistening. I don't want people looking at me like that again. Her voice softened even more. I know, but what happened today doesn't define you. It defines them. The next morning came too soon. The boy barely slept, and his mother looked like she hadn't either. The smell of coffee filled the kitchen, and the light outside was still gray. She sat at the table, scrolling through emails while he picked at his cereal, not really eating. His phone buzzed with messages, friends from the neighborhood asking if he was okay, classmates sharing the video that had already spread online. He didn't even know how to respond. One message stood out. It was from one of his friends at the community center. Bro, it's everywhere. Everyone's talking about it. He turned the phone face down, not wanting to read more. His mother noticed. Is it bad? He shook his head. It's just people asking questions. You don't have to answer any of them, she said. Let me handle it. He didn't argue. Part of him felt embarrassed, even though he hadn't done anything wrong. The attention made him uncomfortable. He didn't want to be known as that kid from the video. Later that morning, his mother got a call from the police department's internal affairs division. She spoke in her usual calm, professional voice, explaining everything she saw and what she expected to happen next. Her tone left no room for misunderstanding. She wasn't asking for attention, she was demanding accountability. After she hung up, she looked over at her son. They're going to review the footage and the officer's body cameras. It's going to take some time, he nodded. So that's it? We just wait? For now, she said. But waiting doesn't mean doing nothing. He didn't understand what she meant, but she didn't explain right away. She stood up, grabbed her jacket, and told him to get ready. We're going for a drive. They drove in silence for a while, passing through familiar streets. Eventually, she turned into the parking lot of the community center where he played basketball. It was early, so only a few people were there. She parked and turned to him. This is where you were before everything happened, right? He nodded. Yeah. Then this is where we start. You need to remember that your life isn't defined by one bad moment. It's made up of 1,000 good ones too. He looked at her, unsure what she meant. You mean, just keep going? Yes, she said simply. Keep living. Keep walking. Keep being you. He stared out the window at the court where he and his friends usually played. A few kids were already shooting hoops. It felt strange, normal life continuing like nothing happened. He wanted to go out there, but part of him hesitated. He was afraid people would stare, whisper, ask questions he didn't want to answer. She seemed to sense it. Go on, she said softly. I'll wait here. He looked at her for a moment, then nodded and stepped out. As he walked toward the court, a few of his friends waved. One of them called out, "Hey man, you good?" He nodded slightly, forcing a small smile. Yeah, I'm good. They passed him the ball, and soon he was dribbling again. The familiar sound of sneakers on the floor and the echo of bouncing balls filled the air. For a few minutes, everything felt normal again. He wasn't the kid from the video. He was just another teenager playing basketball with his friends. Watching from the car, his mother felt a small wave of relief. She knew the road ahead would be long. There would be meetings, questions, maybe even media attention. But right now, seeing him laugh again, even for a moment, gave her hope. That afternoon, back at home, she received another call, this time from a news outlet asking for a statement. She declined politely. She wasn't looking for headlines. She just wanted change. Quiet change, the kind that actually lasts. Later in the evening, she sat with her son again. You might hear more about this in the next few days, she said. People might talk. Just remember you didn't do anything wrong. He nodded. I know, she smiled faintly. Good, because sometimes people will try to make you forget that. He looked at her carefully. Does this kind of thing happen a lot? Her eyes softened, more than it should. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I want to do something about it. She raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? I don't know, I just don't want to stay quiet. Maybe if I tell people what it felt like, it'll make them think before they do the same thing to someone else. A small, proud smile appeared on her face. That's brave. And smart. But make sure when you speak, you do it with calm and truth. Not anger, he nodded. Like you? She laughed softly. Something like that. That night, the boy sat at his desk with a notebook open. He started writing. Just thoughts at first, then full sentences. About fear, confusion, but also about courage and strength. He wrote about how it felt when his mother showed up. How her voice had cut through everything. He didn't know what he'd do with those words yet, but it felt good to write them down. In the other room, his mother was on her laptop again, typing out her report, attaching documents, organizing every detail. Her professionalism was her armor, but deep down she was still shaken. She kept glancing at the hallway, listening for him, needing to know he was okay. When he finally came downstairs holding the notebook, she looked up. What's that? Just something I wrote, he said. About what happened. Can I read it? He hesitated. Not yet. Maybe later. She nodded, respecting his space. That's okay. He smiled faintly. Thanks for showing up, Mom. Her eyes softened, and for a second she couldn't speak. She reached out, pulling him into a hug. Always, she whispered. No matter what. Outside, the night was calm again. The same street that had felt so tense just a day before was now quiet and still. But inside their home, something had changed. Something stronger had grown between them. Trust, understanding, and a shared resolve that what happened would not be forgotten. But it also would not define them. As the lights in the house dimmed and they both finally rested, the story that had begun in fear was slowly turning into something else. A story of strength, of voice, and of the quiet courage that comes from standing up when it matters most. The moment the woman stepped out of her car, the whole street went silent. Her steps were firm, her eyes sharp, and her voice carried a weight that cut through the noise. Get your hands off my son, she said clearly, every word steady like a command. For a few seconds, nobody moved. The officers froze, their hands still gripping the teen's arms. The boy's heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. He turned his head slightly and saw her, the one person who had always told him to stay calm, to never react out of anger, to believe that truth would protect him. The officers looked at each other confused. One of them tried to speak, but his voice came out weak. Ma'am, we were just... He started, but the woman was already pulling something out of her jacket pocket. She held it up for everyone to see, a gold badge that glimmered under the streetlight. FBI, she said simply. And that's my son you're holding. Gasps went through the small crowd that had gathered around. Some people took a few steps closer. Others started whispering. One officer slowly loosened his grip on the boy's arm, his face pale now. The other kept his hand near his belt, unsure what to do. The woman took one step closer, her voice calm but icy. You're going to tell me exactly what happened here, and why you thought it was okay to pin a child to the ground without probable cause. The taller officer tried to explain. We got a call about a robbery suspect, ma'am. The description, she didn't let him finish. The description. Let me guess, young, wearing a hoodie, dark skin. Her tone was sharp but controlled. That's not a description. That's a stereotype. The officer opened his mouth, then closed it again. The woman's eyes didn't move from his. She had been trained to read faces, to catch lies, to sense fear, and she saw it all right there. Do you have body cams on? She asked flatly. Yes, ma'am, one officer replied quickly. Good, she said. Then make sure you keep them on, because this whole situation is going to be reviewed by your department and by my office. The boy stood quietly behind her, still breathing heavily, dirt on his hands from where he had fallen. She turned to him and softened immediately. Are you hurt? She asked. He shook his head even though his knees stung and his palms burned. She reached out, brushing some dirt off his sleeve, her eyes scanning his face to make sure he was really okay. She then turned back to the officers. You two drew your weapons on a teenager who wasn't resisting. Did you ask for ID? Did you verify his name before escalating? One of them muttered something about procedure, but his voice trailed off when he saw her expression. There was no reason for this to happen, she said. You don't get to treat people like suspects because they look a certain way. You don't get to assume guilt. The tension in the air felt heavy. Even the neighbors who were watching from their porches stayed quiet, as if afraid to interrupt. A few people had their phones out recording everything. The woman noticed but didn't stop them. She knew those recordings might be the only reason anyone would believe what happened tonight. The officers were sweating now, both of them aware that the balance of power had shifted completely. She stood taller, her calm control making them look smaller, more uncertain. "Names," she said suddenly. "Both of you. And badge numbers." They hesitated for a moment before she added, "Now." One officer gave his name and badge number quickly, his voice almost trembling. The other followed, his tone quieter. She wrote them down in a small notepad she always carried. "I'll be following up with your captain," she said. "You can expect to hear from Internal Affairs." She took a deep breath, then looked around at the people watching. "You can all go home," she said softly. "Thank you for staying. You made sure this didn't end worse, but no one moved." The crowd wanted to see what would happen next. The officers exchanged glances again, clearly wanting to get back to their car and leave, but not daring to move without her permission. Finally, she stepped back, motioning to her son. "Let's go," she said gently. He picked up his backpack, still shaking slightly. She placed a hand on his shoulder and guided him toward the car. Before getting in, she turned one last time toward the officers. "I've spent my entire career working to protect this country," she said quietly. "And tonight, you reminded me that some of the people wearing the same uniform still don't understand what justice really means." The officers didn't reply. They just stood there, their faces pale as she and her son drove away. Inside the car, there was a long silence. The teen stared out the window, watching the flashing lights fade behind them. His mother kept both hands on the wheel, her jaw tight. After a few minutes, he said softly, "I thought they were going to—" "He didn't finish the sentence, I know," she said. "I know you did." Her voice trembled for the first time all night. "You did everything right. You stayed calm. I'm proud of you." He turned to look at her. "You weren't even supposed to be home yet," he said quietly. "I wasn't," she replied. "But something told me to take a different route tonight. I saw the lights from down the block. They drove in silence again. The city lights passed by in long blurred lines. He could still feel the sting of fear in his chest, like it hadn't gone away yet. When they finally got home, she unlocked the door and guided him inside. The house felt unusually quiet. She told him to sit down while she got some antiseptic for his scrapes. As she cleaned his hands, she spoke softly. "What they did was wrong," she said. "But you can't let this define how you see yourself. You know who you are?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said, though his voice was barely above a whisper. "But they didn't even see me. They just saw what they wanted to see." Her hands paused for a second. Then she said, "That's exactly why I do what I do." He looked up at her, confused. "I joined the Bureau because I believed the system could be fixed," she continued. "Because I wanted you to grow up in a world where you could walk home without fear. But nights like this—" Her voice trailed off. She put away the first aid kit and sat across from him at the table. "I'm going to file a report," she said firmly. "I'm going to make sure this doesn't disappear." He nodded, but his eyes were still downcast. "Do you think it'll change anything?" She thought for a long moment before answering. "Maybe not right away," she said. "But change doesn't start big. It starts small, with people who refuse to stay quiet." He thought about that for a while. The memory of the crowd came back to him. The faces, the voices, the people who stayed to watch because they knew something wasn't right. After a few minutes, he asked, "What if you hadn't come?" She looked at him with sad eyes. "Then someone else would have had to step in," she said softly. "And I would have made sure of it one way or another." He smiled faintly for the first time that night. "It was small but real. You always said you'd protect me," he said. "And I always will," she replied. "That's not just a promise. That's a fact." He leaned back in the chair, finally starting to relax. She stood up and poured them both a glass of water. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was calm, filled with quiet understanding. Later, she sat at her desk, typing up a detailed report. Every line, every time, every word she had heard, and she wrote it all down. Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard, her face focused and steady. In another window, notifications from social media were flooding in. Videos from the scene were already circulating online. Comments, shares, outrage, and it was spreading fast. But she ignored it for now. Her focus was on the facts. She hit save, leaned back, and let out a deep breath. The house was quiet again. From down the hall, she heard her son moving around in his room, probably getting ready for bed. When she finally stood and walked to his doorway, she saw him sitting on the edge of the bed, scrolling through his phone. He looked up and smiled weakly. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. "People are already talking about it." She nodded slowly. "Let them. Maybe this time someone will listen." He nodded too, then put his phone down and pulled the blanket over his legs. "Good night," he said softly. "Good night, baby," she replied, brushing his hair gently before turning off the light. As she walked away, she glanced back one last time. For the first time in hours, she allowed herself to breathe. The fear, the anger, the shock, and all of it still lingered, but underneath it was something else. Relief. Her son was safe. And tomorrow she would make sure the world knew exactly why he almost wasn't. The next morning felt calm, almost too calm. The sun peeked through the blinds, casting long stripes of light across the bedroom floor. The teenager lay in bed a little longer than usual, staring at the ceiling. Last night's events replayed in his mind over and over. The officers, the flashing badge, the way his mother had appeared just in time. Even though he was safe, he still felt the weight of the fear, the kind that clung to your chest and refused to leave. Downstairs, his mother was at the kitchen table again, this time with her phone and a stack of papers. She had been working through the night, documenting everything, making sure she had every detail correct. She had already sent a preliminary report to Internal Affairs, outlining what had happened on the street. She knew this would not end quickly, but she also knew it had to be done. There could be no shortcuts when it came to protecting the truth and protecting her son. The boy eventually got out of bed and padded into the kitchen in his socks. He didn't speak at first, just poured a glass of water and took a few sips. His mother looked up and gave him a small smile. "Morning," she said softly. He nodded. "Morning. You sleeping okay?" she asked, her tone gentle. He shrugged. "I guess. It's just everything that happened yesterday. I can't get it out of my head." She put down her pen and reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "I know," she said. "And that's okay. What you're feeling is real and it's normal. But I want you to remember something. Fear doesn't make you weak. It makes you aware." He stared at her hand for a moment, then nodded slowly. I don't want to feel like that again, ever." "I know," she said. "None of us do. But the important thing is, you didn't do anything wrong, and I'll make sure everyone knows that." After breakfast, they decided to go for a walk. The streets were quieter than usual, and the teenager tried to focus on the simple things. The birds, the faint smell of fresh grass, the way the sunlight reflected off the windows. But it was impossible to ignore the memory of the flashing lights, the tense voices, and the feeling of being pinned to the ground. As they walked, she spoke softly. "You know, what happened yesterday will probably be talked about in the neighborhood and maybe even beyond. People will see the video, share it, discuss it. It's going to bring attention, and that attention can be good if it's handled right." He glanced at her. "Do you think people will listen?" "I hope so," she said. "But even if they don't, you have to hold on to your own truth. You know what happened, and that matters more than anything else." They stopped by a small park near their house. A few children were playing, laughter echoing in the air. The teenager watched them quietly for a moment, then turned to his mother. "I feel different now," he said. "Like I can't just walk down the street without thinking about what could happen." She nodded. "It's normal. You've seen the world from a side most kids don't see, but you can't let it change who you are. You have to keep living. Keep playing basketball, keep going to school, keep being yourself, and always remember you're stronger than you think." He looked at her, taking in her words. Slowly, a small smile appeared on his face. "I guess I never thought about it that way." "That's okay," she said. "You're learning, and every day you'll grow a little stronger." Later that week, the police department contacted them. Internal Affairs had begun reviewing the incident, including the video recordings and statements from the officers involved. His mother answered the questions calmly and professionally, making sure the focus remained on what had actually happened. She wasn't looking for revenge. She wanted accountability, and she wanted to make sure that what had happened to her son wouldn't happen to another child. The teenager stayed nearby while she handled the calls. He listened quietly, sometimes asking questions, sometimes just watching. He realized that his mother's calm, precise words carried more weight than any shouting could. He had seen it in action yesterday, but now he saw it again. The power of authority used responsibly, not for intimidation. One evening, after the calls and emails had ended for the day, they sat together in the living room. The boy held his basketball in his lap, bouncing it lightly against the floor. "Do you think it will change anything?" he asked, more to himself than to her. "It already has," she said. "Change doesn't always happen instantly. Sometimes it starts with one story, one voice, one person standing up. You just saw that happen. You just lived that." He thought about the officers, the crowd, the video being shared, and the feeling of fear that had gripped him. He thought about the way his mother had arrived and spoken with authority. "I guess you're right," he said. "It already feels different." She smiled and ruffled his hair gently. "Good. Because that feeling, that sense of control, of understanding, of justice, is yours now. It's not about the officers or anyone else. It's about knowing your value and your rights." Days turned into weeks. The department continued its review, and the neighborhood slowly returned to normal. The teen returned to basketball practice, though he was quieter than before, more thoughtful. He started paying closer attention to his surroundings, noticing small things he had never seen before. The way a neighbor waved, the sounds of traffic, the way people interacted on the street. He realized that safety wasn't something he could take for granted, but it also didn't have to rule his life. At home, his mother continued to balance work and family life. She checked in on him regularly, asking about school, basketball, friends, and his thoughts about the incident. She wanted him to process everything safely, to understand that fear and courage could exist at the same time. She wanted him to know that standing up for oneself didn't always mean confrontation. Sometimes it meant patience, clarity, and using your voice when it mattered most. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, he turned to her. "Do you think people really understand what happened?" She considered it for a moment. "Some will, some won't, but that's okay. What matters is that you know the truth and that you continue to act with integrity. People will see it eventually. And if they don't, at least we know we tried to make a difference." He nodded, staring at the fading sunlight. "I want to help too," he said quietly. "I don't know how yet, but I don't want this to just be my story." "That's the right feeling," she said. "One day you'll find a way. You'll help people understand what it feels like, what it means to be treated unfairly, and how to stand up for themselves without fear. For now, just focus on learning, growing, and being the best version of yourself. Everything else will follow." The weeks that followed brought more clarity. The officers involved received disciplinary action, though the teen and his mother were not seeking punishment. It wasn't about that. It was about accountability and making sure that what had happened would be remembered, understood, and corrected. The neighborhood slowly settled back into its usual rhythm. The boy started attending practice regularly, laughing and joking with his friends again. The memory of that terrifying night still lingered, but it no longer controlled him. He realized that fear could coexist with courage, and that one could still walk through the world even after being frightened. His mother watched him closely, proud of how he was handling himself. She knew that the world wasn't always fair, and that fear might return in different ways, but she also knew that he now had something stronger than fear, the knowledge that he was seen, valued, and protected. She had shown him that, and he had carried it forward. One evening, as they prepared dinner together, he looked at her and said, "I think I understand now. Being brave isn't about never being scared. It's about facing it and still moving forward." She smiled, feeling a mix of relief and pride. "Exactly. That's exactly right." Later that night, as he went to bed, he thought about the events that had changed his life forever. The fear, the panic, the uncertainty. All of it had been real, but so had the courage, the protection, and the love that had followed. He realized that his mother's presence had been more than just intervention. It had been a lesson, a demonstration of strength, and a reminder that standing up for what is right can make all the difference. He drifted to sleep thinking about tomorrow, not with fear, but with hope. He knew the world could be unjust, that people could make mistakes, and that unfairness could appear at any time. but he also knew that courage, truth, and love could outweigh fear. He understood now that even in the darkest moments, someone showing up, someone standing firm, could change everything. And as he slept, his mother sat quietly at the kitchen table, reviewing notes, reflecting, and making plans. She had done what any parent would do, using both her skill and her heart. And though the night had brought fear, confusion, and danger, it had also shown her son the depth of protection, the importance of voice, and the power of love. The world outside was calm. The streets were quiet, the neighbors asleep, and the night stretched on without incident. Inside the